this lesson, you'll learn how to implement the key content provider methods using templates for the provider and its interface. Recall that the content interface uses the 5 key methods that are included in the Content Resolver class, and the content provider uses the methods that are part of its class. These methods work as a team to change data in and get data from the databases. What we need to do is be able to implement code in the content interface and the content provider for each of the methods. This graphic shows how each pair of methods, for example, for the insert method in the content interface and insert method in the content provider, work together to take data from the user interface and add it to the database. Each of the 5 methods works in essentially the same way, except the parameters and return values are different. After we go through this graphic, I'll show you the actual code templates. Hopefully, this conceptual graphic will help you to understand the code. The concepts will make more sense when you put them side by side with the actual code. The content interface is collecting inputs from the user interface to create parameters for method execution, and the return value it sets up can be sent back to the user interface. On the content provider side, notice that the methods are overriding the methods in the content interface, which are actually content resolver methods. The parameters used by the content provider methods are passed through from the content interface. The net effect of all this is the execution of methods accessing the database. This should all start to make more sense as we look at the code, so let's get started. We'll start with the content interface. The way these templates are set up is that you would make changes to them depending on the access method you're coding: query, insert, update, delete, get type. So in the first section, you'd create the code to generate the parameters necessary for, let's say, the insert method. And you might consult our table of parameters to see that for the insert method you need the URI and possibly content values. So the code to create those would go here. Next, you'd define a return value for, say, the insert method, which, as we see here in the comment, is another URI. So you could use the statement as shown here: URI mReturn equals new URI. Next, you'd code the statement to execute the appropriate access method in the content resolver, say insert. You'd substitute insert for access. Then you'd include the appropriate parameters. For an insert, those would be URI, mURI, and values, or the parameter name mValues we're using here. And these, once again, would have been defined up top in our first code section. Now let's take a look at the companion methods in the content provider. First, you'd use the URI matcher class and methods to take any actions needed for a given URI. And this would be highly application dependent. We've already looked at the Notepad app and seen what URI matching was done there. Next, you'd define the code to override the method in the content interface content resolver that we looked at in the previous code. To do this, you'd make a couple of substitutions. First, changing return to the type of variable needed. So for an insert method, it would be URI. Second, you would change the access type to the type of access, for example, insert. So here it would be URI insert. Then in the parameters, you'd include the appropriate parameters for the method. So for our insert method, it would be this URI and content values. Next comes the body of the access method, which is detailed in the next graphic. The body begins with defining a return variable for the database operation. So you would select one depending on the type of access. For an insert method, that would be URI. You'd define URI mReturn. Next, you'd perform the database operation, substituting the access type, for example, insert. And then you'd use the parameters appropriate for that operation. We'll leave the discussion of these operations for our chapters on database. Next, you'd perform notification depending on the access type. For example, using the notify change method for an insert access. And notifications let other methods know when changes have taken place in the database. For example, methods that are listing results in the user interface. And finally, you'd return the results from the database operation. And these results end up going back through to our content interface and then possibly on to the user interface. As an additional aid to understanding this flow of data through methods, the developer's website has some examples for each type of access. So if we look at the content provider page in the API guides and click on implementing the content provider class, we see a discussion of the methods and some code samples. Now let's look at an implementation of one of the methods in the Notepad app. We'll use the update method. In the Notepad app, content interface activities are spread over the notes list, note editor, title editor, and Notepad Java files. In the note editor, at statement 586, we have the update method applied to the content resolver obtained using the getContentResolver method. It includes the URI and content values parameters. The selection parameters are left null, and the return value is not being assigned or used. In the Notepad Provider Java file, at statement 677, we have the twin update method overriding the method in the content resolver. It refers to the four parameters, URI, content values, and the selection strings. The body of the method, at statement 692, executes an SQL update method to change the records in the database. Notice the count of changed rows is returned from the execution of that method. In statement 743, the notify change method is used to tell the system that records have been changed. And at statement 746, it returns the count that came as a return from the SQLite update method. So that's our lesson on content provider method templates and our final lesson on content providers. Now, in addition to explaining and demonstrating content providers, these lessons have introduced you to a multi-module and somewhat intricate application. Part of the challenge in developing Android apps is being able to sort through, understand, and apply a wide variety of Android classes, methods, parameters, and Java constructs. Hopefully, these lessons have helped give you a good start at learning how to deal with this complexity.